I said I would introduce Vajradevi, just say a few words. Um, Vajradevi is the same age as me, I've just discovered, although I always assumed we were similar. She came across Buddhism via the LBC somewhere around 1984, and I first came across her in about 1989, 1990 on one of the LBC summer retreats. I remember her doing Aikido outside. Uh, that was quite memorable. And she was ordained in 1995, and through a lot of her time of being involved with the Triratna, she's worked in team-based right livelihood businesses, including I don't know if it's really a business, but well, it was her business for a while to hunt for a retreat center in Spain for the women's ordinations to take place in. So that was occupying her for quite some time. And now she lives in Shrewsbury and runs retreats, and which we're going to hear quite a bit about now. So very, very good to have you here, Vajradevi.
Thank you very much. Okay. So actually, what I'm going to be saying has quite a lot of relevance to how I'm feeling right now, which is very hot and sticky, actually. I do think mindfulness has a lot to do with being with whatever is happening and noticing how you're relating to it, whether there's some degree of aversion to being sticky and sweaty and a desire for things to be different. So I'll just maybe say what I'm going to be doing this evening. So I'm going to talk probably for about 40 minutes around mindfulness as a path to insight or wisdom, which is the territory of the book that I've written, that I also have a copy of here. Yeah, then we'll have a little break, and then I'll lead a meditation in the style of the book. And then there'll be a bit of time where if you have any comments, any questions, or anything you'd like to say about that particular meditation, then there'll be some time for that. And that bit, just to say, that bit won't be recorded. That won't be part of the recording. Just the meditation and the talk will be recorded. And that then I'll hand over to Santva to finish off the evening. Okay, so yeah, maybe I'll just say a little bit more about my own approach, my own way in, if you like, to the material in the book, because it's something that I sort of fell into about 25 years ago, and I've probably been teaching it for about 20 years, or maybe just over 20 years. But I came to meditation through quite a lot of struggle with it. I seem to find it impossible not to try too hard, and then get quite tense. And yeah, and I have chronic migraine anyway, so I just give myself more migraines. But that was, in a funny way, I still love meditation. I didn't find it enjoyable. I didn't think I was any good at it, and yet I really felt the value of it. I felt that it was very, very important. I sort of, well, there was a whole sort of number of steps actually, but they took me into a way of practice that was much more receptive. It was much more about recognizing and acknowledging what was actually happening, rather than what I wanted to happen or what I thought should happen. And actually, because I worked with quite a lot of physical pain, that was really helpful. Suddenly pain was not a problem. Pain was just part of the landscape that I could be aware of what was happening. I could be aware of how I was relating to that pain and to what degree there was aversion towards it, or to what degree there was this strong desire for something else to be happening. And so actually it just opened up things a lot. And it was only after I'd been practicing it for a number of years that I, with different teachers, different meditation teachers in different traditions, that I realized that it was the Satipatthana Sutta. I was meditating on material from the Satipatthana Sutta, and then I got really interested in exploring the sutta, and I was one of the readers for Anala's first book, which I found absolutely fascinating. At the time, I suggested they cut out the footnotes, or they put the footnotes somewhere else, because there were so many of them. But actually, I found, in terms of my own teaching, those are the bits that I use the most. Actually, he has some fantastic footnotes in his especially the first book, Satipatthana, The Direct Path to Realization. So I've followed my nose. I've practiced with teachers in the States and in Burma, particularly Burma. Really exploring a method that, as I say, is quite receptive, but it emphasizes direct experience. It emphasizes the experience that you're already having. So it emphasizes receptivity rather than a sort of doing mode, trying to do something. And it's an approach that emphasizes wisdom. It emphasizes clear seeing. So the main building blocks, if you like, are mindfulness, and I may say awareness, mindfulness, awareness. I use them synonymously. So mindfulness and right view, or a wisdom perspective, or a Dhamma perspective. So in our Triratna context, I think there are two ways where the practice that I'm going to be describing, two ways where it comes up. So one is in just sitting. So in just sitting, we don't direct the mind. We do what the Buddha called undirected practice. We can contrast that with, say, the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana, where we do direct the mind. We direct it towards the breath. We direct it towards imagining someone or the phrases. So directed practice or undirected practice. We can use the mind in different ways. And so this Satipatthana practice, often it's closer to just sitting as an undirected practice than it is to more directed practices. But having said that, in Burma alone, there are about 40 different ways that you can practice with the Satipatthana Sutta. So it's very versatile, it's very flexible, and there's many ways of using the material. And if you're familiar with the sutta, you'll know it's got a lot of Dharma in it. It's got a lot of the really fundamental Buddhist teachings. So the other way, the other way that this practice connects in with Triratna is in terms of our mandala of practice. So we've got integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and spiritual receptivity. So don't worry if you're not familiar with that, but for those of you that are, it's just a way of sort of locating what I'm going to be saying in this context. So this practice is clearly in the realm of spiritual receptivity, and the aim is in the territory of spiritual death. Spiritual death is when it's not talked about as spiritual death, it's talked about as insight or wisdom. That's where the spiritual death is headed. Okay, so all that is just by way of introduction. So I want to say maybe 4 things about mindfulness And I'm going to draw on, actually it's the second chapter in the book. So this is mindfulness at its most developed. And that's a combination of factors. It's a combination of these 4 factors that are found quite frequently in the Pali Canon. And it's a way that the Buddha uses these 4 qualities of mind to define right mindfulness, samasati. So mindfulness, as I say, at its most developed. And this is some of them more strongly than others, but at least some of these factors are where mindfulness or awareness and wisdom are working together. And there's this lovely compound term, satipanya, which means awareness, wisdom. So that's what's being got at with some of these qualities. So the first one is really, really simple. And so mindfulness always happens in the present moment. So you can tune into what's happening with you right now. Tune into the present moment. Tune into being aware. Just as I'm speaking, you can notice what's happening in the body and in your mind. And if you can sort of feel into what's happening, and do it in a very relaxed way. So you relax and you settle back or rest back. It's almost like physically you're resting into some sort of armchair, which actually with Zoom we quite often are these days, aren't we? We have much more armchair meditation than we ever do in centers. But it's the same, it's the feeling of settling back. It's natural. Mindfulness has a natural quality to just be present with what's happening without trying to change anything, without trying to make the breath feel different or change how we feel, just being present with what's happening. And what's happening is happening through the 6 senses. It's happening through the 5 physical senses. So we'll be aware of sounds, of sights, body sensations, maybe smells and tastes, depending, a little bit not so available generally. And then we've got the mind sense. So that the mind sense has a lot of different things going on: thinking, imagining, feeling, remembering, but also knowing, quality of knowing and the quality of being aware. So that's to do with the mind sense. And we use the present moment to help build more moments of mindfulness by just remembering the present moment, just remembering what's happening now, or reminding ourselves, oh, what's happening in this moment, and the next, and the next. I'll say a little bit more about continuity later. But what we're doing is we are looking in mindfulness practice, we're looking to increase the number of moments of mindfulness, the number of moments where we're just aware. And we can be aware of anything. We don't need to be aware of a specific thing. It's not as if in this practice you need to be aware of the breath, or you need to be specifically aware of the body. Those will, those objects will arise, but you can be aware of anything, be mindful of anything, and that will help build some continuity, mindfulness. So relaxed, spacious, open, and natural. Some of the qualities of the present moment. So I want to go on to the second of these 4 points, which is to do with the quality of effort or the quality of energy that we use. And I would say that it's quite crucial, that quality of energy, and we're using the minimum effort that you can. Use as little effort as you can and still be present. And that's maybe quite a strong way of saying it, but so often we overestimate the amount of effort that we put into, especially something as when we're working with really subtle things like awareness and the mind. The mind is also really subtle. So minimum effort and still be present. So when we use too much energy, too much effort to notice what's happening, to be aware of what's happening, it's easy to get tense. And that was what was happening to me a lot in my early years of practice. I wasn't aware of how much energy I was using. And it's quite a journey, I think, to just regularly tune into how much energy you're using, where you feel perhaps a sense of leaning forward in your practice rather than that settling back, where you feel a sense of perhaps going out and reaching out towards experience rather than receiving what's happening, receiving the breath, receiving body sensations or sounds. It makes it actually much more pleasant to do that than constantly sort of reaching out. And that tends to sort of tighten the mind. So maybe we'll do a little exercise here. It's very, very simple, and those of you that have been on retreat with me will be familiar with it. So I'm gonna hold my hands in view, but feel free to just keep yours where they're comfortable. Don't feel they have to be on the screen. But I'm just going to suggest that you, my rather sweaty paws, I'm going to put your hands together, excuse me, so that perhaps the fingers are touching and the base of the palms are touching, and you can just feel how it is when the fingers are touching and then when they separate. So just make and break that connection and just tune into the sensations that you notice. Just be present to the sensations that you notice. And you might find that labels come. Notice heat or stickiness or vibration, whatever it is. You don't need to label it, but you can just be aware. So the question is, how much energy does it take to be aware of these sensations? So relax your hands when you want to. You don't need to unmute here, but does anyone think, maybe just stick your hand up if you think it takes a lot of energy to be aware of what was happening? No, I can see some head shakes. Yeah, anyone think that it actually took very little energy at all? Yeah. Okay, one or two people. Yes. Yeah. So that's generally the what people think is the experience is that it takes very little energy once we're present. And in this instant, there's a little bit of directing the mind towards particular sensations. But generally, it takes very little energy if we're present. That's the main difference, I would say. And that happens through that first point in the present mindfulness, in the present moment, the remembering to be present, the reminding ourselves to be present. And so that's the quality of energy or the quality of effort that you're looking for, just enough to know what's happening. So sometimes it can feel like there's too much going on to be aware. You know, maybe things are happening really fast, or perhaps, you know, particularly off the cushion. And I just want to give you a little example of, if you like, how the mind can meet that sort of situation, because it's happening a lot. So if it happens a lot and we have the idea, oh, I can't really be mindful in this situation, there's too much going on, or things are happening too fast, then we lose that continuity. We sort of let go of the idea that it is possible. So so the example I'm thinking of is I used to go to, before lockdown, I went quite regularly to Symphony Hall in Birmingham to classical music concerts. And often there'd be a full orchestra, which was fantastic. And they'd often be a piano piece as well, or piano as part of a larger piece. And I remember just sort of noticing that if I relaxed, if I really settled back, even though the pianist's fingers were going like the clappers, I didn't need to look at that, but I could hear every single note. And actually that was pretty fast, but the mind was quite capable of knowing what was happening, because it was relaxed and because it was present. It could hear each note. So actually the mind can take in a lot, and it can take it in almost effortlessly if we're relaxed and if we're present. Maybe one last thing around this. So what I'm pointing to is a quality of effort that's not strenuous or active. I think we can think in terms of patience and perseverance, steadiness of mind, but also a quality of sorry, cat's bottom, a quality of interest and emotional engagement is really really helpful. When I think interest is the beginnings of wisdom, actually. When we're interested in something, I think we're less likely to take it personally, a bit more willing to see what's happening rather than our ideas about what we want to be happening getting in the way too strongly. So that emotional engagement, that quality of interest, is really crucial. And it can make a difference in the quality of effort, in that rather than sort of doing mindfulness, we feel the awareness. I don't mean in the sense of an emotion, but more in the sense of a bit more a felt sense, or a sort of almost a sort of tactile sense of quality of awareness. Okay, so that's the second thing. So mindfulness always happens in the present moment, and the quality of energy that we use is crucial. So the third thing, so Bhante Sangha talked about awareness being revolutionary. And I think actually acceptance is revolutionary as well. So acceptance of what is happening brings a certain amount of contentment and happiness to the mind. I think it's another wisdom quality. So it's not a passivity, but it's a willingness to be with what's happening, even when we really don't like it. It's quite unwanted. You know, we might find something really unpleasant, but rather than resisting what's happening, we are more willing to be with it. Actually, where it gets quite cool, I think, is that actually we can be resisting an experience, but we can also be aware. We can have some acceptance. Oh, resistance is happening. What's that like? There's that quality of interest again. What's that like? What's the mind like when it's experiencing resistance or resisting. And I don't know about you, but I find there are quite a few opportunities in which to practice noticing the mind that is resisting, the mind that's doing all sorts of things. And in one of the chapters in the book, I think it's chapter 4, I tell a particular story. At the end of each chapter, I've got what I call mindful life moments. And these are moments of practice, my own practice, which I've written about in my blog. So I've drawn some of these pieces from the blog. And they're really about how I work with the practice in my own life. So chapter 4, there's one about a trip to the dentist. But actually, I won't tell you about that one because hopefully you can read about that one. But I've another little example of this was a couple of weeks ago. I was camping on the Welsh coast. Beautiful, beautiful. Campsite high on the hills overlooking the sea. My partner and I went for a walk. And there were quite a few horseflies on the walk. And I'm a bit of a bug magnet. So they were buzzing around him, but they didn't really, my partner, but they didn't really go for him, but they all went for me. So I couldn't stop, we couldn't really stop to take photos, couldn't really stop to look at the view without being them landing. So there was quite a lot of agitation in my mind because horsefly bites are quite unpleasant. I don't know how familiar you are with them, probably most people are, and they stick to you, so they're quite difficult to get off, especially get off with if you don't want to do them any harm. So I found it really interesting working with something that I didn't want to be happening. And I measured in a way the reactivity in my mind, partly by how loud I screamed each time I caught one. I was like, ah! And how fast I tried to sort of flick it off. And so I worked specifically on those two things. Okay, there's a big reaction in the mind. I can watch that. And I got about a dozen bites or stings, whatever they are. And the last 3, I managed not to yelp or scream. And I managed not to be a bit calmer about how I got them off my skin so that I didn't harm them. And my partner and I, during this period, we were talking about working with unpleasant experience. We were talking about it, making it a bit more sort of conscious. So we were practicing with it as we were walking. And then we got to a point where they stopped. I guess the altitude was a bit too high for the horseflies, so we left them behind. And then I was just with the sensations of the stings. And by this point they'd sort of swollen up, so they're quite big, sort of red throbbing patches on all over my arms and all over my legs. And actually that was much more straightforward to be in. I didn't have so much agitation in the mind or feeling under attack. It was relatively simple actually to just be with sensation, just be with not pleasant sensation, but just to be with it amongst all the other things. The sky was completely blue, the sun was shining, the sea and the hills, and talking about practice with my partner. And at some point we did take a photo, and I sent it to a friend when I got back, and she was like, "Oh, you look so happy in that picture." And I thought, well, I was, even though, there was quite a lot of unpleasant experience going on. Actually, there was an okayness with it. It was just part of what was happening. It didn't sort of narrow me down. It didn't become the thing that I focused on. But actually, there was the mindfulness stayed quite broad, quite open, was able to sort of really appreciate other things that were also within my experience. So all that can be sort of seen in awareness. This is where I think that there's nothing that needs to be excluded from mindfulness. And acceptance is what makes the difference between arguing with reality, arguing with what's happening or complaining about what's happening. And actually, you do what you can. And when you can't do anything, okay, is it possible to watch your mind and accept to some degree what's happening? Or accept that you can't accept it. That's always possible too. Okay, so the last thing, so this is I'm going to talk about what is the mind knowing. This is one of the questions that I drop into my own practice, and it's to highlight this sense of clearly knowing with some degree of wisdom or right view what's happening. And there's a perspective in right view, and there's a perspective in right mindfulness, which goes something like we're learning to relate to experience as experience. Sounds very simple. We're learning to relate to experience as experience. Something that's happening in the moment, my tingling of my skin with the bites is happening in the moment. But what's loosened in that perspective is the sense of my skin. Actually, there's tingling, there's redness, but there's all sorts of things, but they don't have to be taken so personally. So that's this quality is really working with a perspective that frees us from relating to things in a very personal way, or it shows up how we're doing that. So I've just got a few little examples maybe of perhaps the difference between mindfulness or sati and this quality I mentioned earlier, satipanya, so mindfulness and wisdom or awareness wisdom. So there's lots and lots of different ways that we can experience a moment of clear seeing, a moment of clearly knowing, a moment of insight. And I think that's partly what makes it really exciting, is because you just can't really predict what type of understanding the mind is going to have on any particular moment. So if we're mindful rather than mindful with panya, with wisdom, perhaps we can be aware of looking at something, aware of the colors and shapes of something. And it can be really vivid, especially on retreat or when you've been doing quite a bit of practice. There can be a very sort of pleasant sense of aliveness, of beauty, of vividness in some of the objects that we notice. Maybe it's flowers, maybe it's the leaves on the trees, whatever it is. Or it might be that when you're sitting in meditation, just really feeling the sense of the fabric touching your skin. So we can be mindful of all those things. With satipanya, it's almost like the perspective is a little bit different. So we're aware of all those things that I've just described, but we're also aware that the process of seeing is happening. It's like we've gone a little bit further back, a little bit closer to source of the experience. So a bit less attention on the flower, the leaves on the tree, the sensation on the touching of the skin, and a little bit more back with seeing is happening, touch sensation happening. So there's a little bit more connection with the nature of an experience rather than the concept, rather than the idea about something. So that's one little facet. Okay, so another one, maybe let's use the touch sensation again. I've already alluded to this. So when we're mindful, we can be aware of a lot of different body sensations. We can be very mindful of the body. We can be mindful of our movements, of different sensations, of the clothes touching the skin. One aspect of mindfulness with wisdom in the mix through right mindfulness is we can be aware of how we're relating to that experience. So it might be that the clothing on the skin, actually there's quite a lot of, maybe we find it quite unbearable in the heat. It's like really sticky or really sweaty. So actually what we become aware of in that moment, it's not, we don't need to judge that experience, but we can recognize that, oh, we're relating to the experience with aversion. What's that like? What does that feel like in the mind? What does it feel like in the body? Aversion, maybe it's irritation, or so if you like, those ways of relating, they too become things that can be known. They become objects of experience. So they don't sort of go, if they go unnoticed, they're likely to just grow. But when we turn our attention to them, turn our awareness to them, then with interest in the present moment, with an acceptance of them being there rather than some idea that they shouldn't be there, then it all becomes very interesting. It becomes, oh, this too can be an object recognized in awareness. So we're watching the mind, and through the mind we're knowing what's happening through any of the different senses, including the mind sense. So the last little example is to do with thoughts. So actually doesn't take much in the way of, in terms of mindfulness, to be aware of what we're thinking. Be aware of what we're thinking. And even if we've only been half aware, it's usually quite possible to know, oh, I was thinking about that. So that's, if you like, being mindful of the content of our thoughts, knowing what our thoughts are, but knowing a thought as a thought in the moment feels very different. Again, you've got that slightly different perspective. What does a thought feel like in the mind when you notice it happening? And you will notice the content as well. It's not, that doesn't need to sort of disappear. But when you notice a thought as a thought, there's often less identification with it. We don't automatically believe it to be true. But there's some degree of a wiser involvement with that experience, rather than being completely sort of enmeshed or merged with it. And thoughts are the thing that we usually identify our sense of self with most strongly. So to be able to notice thinking as thinking, and to feel what that experience is like, is very, very helpful in terms of relaxing that grip of self-identification with I'm the one who thinks all these thoughts. Thoughts are happening in the moment, in the mind. How is it to be with them? So how we know makes all the difference. And chapter 4 again, so chapter 4 in the book is on right view, and that gives both the theory and practical way to help establish a Dharma perspective in the back of the mind, some degree of right view. And when it's in the back of the mind, it becomes, well, the metaphor becomes the lens that we look through. So how we see is always dependent upon the lens that we're looking through. And we know this, we know that if our lens is one of a strong craving, then whatever we see, that will be enacted. I want this, and I want that, and I want this. And the same with aversion. But when awareness and right view, if you like, become that lens that we're able to establish the viewfinder that we are looking through, then yeah, we can say that we have this Dharma perspective in mind, and we'll see things differently. So as well as chapter 4, also chapter 7, one of the later chapters, is also where I have a big look at how to recognize wisdom in the mind, how to recognize those moments of wisdom, because we all have them, and also how to recognize delusion, because we all have that as well. And most of us have more of that. So it's actually, if you like, even more important to recognize, what does delusion feel like in the mind? How do I know when? And we do it through directly tuning in with what's happening in the present moment. We don't try and theorize about what delusion is. It's helpful to have some information, it's really helpful, but then you just need to leave it in the background and just be present to the moment of oh, I think this might be delusion in the mind. Yeah. So if you like, that chapter is part of the helpful, hopefully helpful, what goes on at the back of the mind to help recognize wisdom and delusion as they're happening. Okay, so I've got a little bit more I can say about the book, but I think I'll leave it for a bit later. So let's have 10-minute break. Come back at 8 o'clock and I'll lead through a meditation where hopefully you can get a bit more of a sense of how to work in sitting meditation. Though, of course, the practice is very much one that can be taken off the cushion as well. And then, yes, if you have a question or a comment, maybe just jot it down so you don't forget it. And we'll have a bit of time for that after the meditation. So yeah, feel free to get a drink, or I understand that sometimes you just like to chat in the break, but up to you, and I'll see you in 10 minutes. And yeah, so I'll lead through a sit. It'll probably be just under half an hour or so to leave enough time to have a bit more interaction. Yeah, so, oh yeah, I know what I was going to say, I forgot. I live next door to a bowling green, and sometimes it sounds more like they're playing football than bowling. It's very good-natured and quite loud. So there may be some sounds going on to sit, so that's fine. We'll be working with hearing and sounds just as a way to awareness. Could be very, very helpful to have sounds in a way to bring us back to the present moment. Okay, at the moment it's mainly the wood pigeons. Okay, so feel free to do what you want with your own screen. If you want to turn it off, or if you just want to look away
from your screen. You'll be able to hear what's being said. So start in a really natural way. Sit comfortably. You may well be in a meditation posture, but you might need to move your body a little bit more first, just to settle into the space. You might find that your eyes are wanting to go in a particular direction. It might be that they're not quite ready to close or to look down at something neutral. Perhaps they're looking at your shrine or my shrine on the screen. So it's helpful to tune into what feels natural in the body and the mind, and come into the practice by following those clues. What feels helpful to awareness right now? Settling back. So that your posture is relaxed but attentive, alert. And your mind is, to the extent it can be, that your mind is relaxed and awake. So you're just looking to notice when you're in the present moment. So what's happening in that moment is secondary. Secondary to that noticing of knowing that you're aware in the moment, whenever that happens. You're noticing the quality of the mind, how the mind feels when it's aware in the present moment. Every now and again, just remembering the present moment, and tuning in with what it feels like, or reminding yourself to come to the present moment. You might be noticing sounds, different body sensations, sometimes the breath, sometimes thoughts. Just seeing whatever happens not as a distraction, but as something that awareness can know. Being aware of whatever object presents itself through any of the senses. If you can really relax and settle back, you can start to notice where the attention is going. A moment where the mind reaches out to a sound, and then perhaps another sound, or a body sensation. And you can maintain awareness as the attention moves between different objects. Awareness can accompany attention. Attention is like a butterfly moving from leaf to leaf. And awareness knows those movements, but it can also know other things that are happening. Sense of your body on the cushion, or in the chair. Perhaps seeing either with your eyes open or internal seeing with your eyes closed. Every now and again, just noticing the quality of effort or energy that you're using. And seeing if it's possible to reduce any unnecessary effort. If you find that there's any sort of inner reaching forward towards experience, just notice that and seeing if it's possible to settle back, receive whatever's happening. And if you find at some point that your mind has wandered off or it's got caught up in a story, various thoughts, see if it's possible to stay with that moment when awareness realizes that's what's happened. And at that point is back in the present moment. No need to go anywhere or come back to anything. What's happening in that moment? Moment of awakeness. And notice if there's any judgment in the mind for having gotten distracted or got lost. And see if judgment can be just another thing to know. Another part of this mosaic of experience. What does judgment feel like in the mind and in the body? Being curious and being open to any experience, whatever it is. If you notice anything in your experience that feels unpleasant, Perhaps feel what that's like. Feel out any resistance to the experience, any reaction to it. Any ideas in the mind, this shouldn't be happening. It's just an idea, just a thought. And notice any moments where there's acceptance of what's happening. You might be able to identify some degree of contentment or happiness in the mind that's willing to be with things just as they are. And notice if there's some sense of clearly knowing what's happening. Might be that you clearly know the concepts of an experience. That sound is a bird, or a car, or a child. And you might also at times clearly know more the nature of the experience. The nature of a sound simply arising, persisting for some time, and then disappearing. Or the nature of a thought in the mind. Conditioned by previous thoughts and conditioning future thoughts. Not trying to think about these things, but just being present to what's happening. allowing awareness and wisdom to become stronger factors in the mind. And remembering to appreciate your mind for being willing to do the work, building momentum in awareness. What does the mind feel like when there's some degree of appreciation, contentment? Happy to be present.